Hi, this is Liz from The Village Bicycle, and you're listening to Nursery, a podcast from Ohio's Creative Voice.
The nursery and all of the trees cross over the dark, and some old parking lots hold my whimpering thoughts, and I'm on the next train. You and me, can't you see what this means? In the light of a torch, realize nothing is forced, nothing is forced.
Hi everybody, welcome to Nursery, a podcast from Ohio's Creative Voice. My name is Lee Boyle.
And I'm Brandon Noel.
Guys, if you don't know who Brandon Noel is, if you're a local, maybe in the Warren, Ohio area, Youngstown, Ohio area, I have faith you're listening.
Right.
What he's done is he's gotten a group of people together called the Makeshift Poets. They meet, when do they meet?
The first Tuesday of every month.
First Tuesday of every month. You can find them on a page called the Makeshift Volume 1. Do I have that right?
Yeah,
Facebook?
It's on Facebook. So we have a private writers group that you can only get into, like a private group page, if you've come to a meeting. And then we have this like really non-upkept, low-key Facebook page called the Makeshift Volume 1, which is, I post the events and stuff on Facebook, but yeah, it's at the same place, same time every month, the first Tuesday of every month at 8 p.m. at the Havana House Cigar Bar in Niles, Ohio.
Yeah, guys, so this is a call to arms for you lonely poets out there who want friends, man. This is what they do. They critique a little, but it's more about, man, they're going to bring our stuff and share it with each other, correct?
Yeah, it's real low-key. It is not a high pressure, like get up at a podium and talk to a group of people who are like staring at you. We sit around a table and we have some drinks. We have maybe far too many some nights, and we listen and let people tell their stories. It's not always just like, here, read a poem and now you're done. Mm-hmm. But like, we want to know, like, where did you come from with that poem? We'd like to hear. But I mean, if you're against that, you're like, I don't want to share my stories. It's kind of just however you want to make it. Like, we're just kind of an open place for people who, I would say, a group of writers that writers would like, because I've been to readings and stuff like that where I feel like it's more of like I get to come and perform, but the art and the craft of writing isn't really. It's not at the focal point.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
And long-time listeners will know that I like poetry and I try to incorporate it into Nursery. So if you guys, care enough to get into it, Brandon Noel has this podcast that's kind of a follow-up to the group he described, aside from the book, Makeshift Volume 1. The podcast is the Makeshift Podcast. Go to iTunes and you can actually hear an episode that has me, Lee Boyle, on an episode with him, and then you hear this episode with him on mine.
We're just feeding into each other.
Yeah, it's like, so if you're a mega nerd about what we do, you can go explore and find that stuff out. So, before we get into it, just questions about you as like an Ohio poet, I have to mention that you're originally from Florida. Is that right?
Yeah. I grew up in a city in Florida called Ocala, and my connections to Ohio come from my mom and dad, who my dad grew up in Bedford, and my mom, she moved around the country. Her dad, my grandfather, was a pastor, and he lived in several different places, even in Canada for a little while, but eventually they landed in Ohio, I believe in the Parma Park area, or in Ashland. The family history is muddy once it gets to Ohio, but but I know that my mom and dad met, here in Ohio. But even when I lived in Florida, it felt like I was from Ohio because like all my family trips, all my vacations, people vacation in Florida. But yes. Being and living in Florida, like, we always vacationed to Ohio because all of my family has always been here.
That's crazy, because you always hear the opposite.
Right.
I mean, around here, everyone moves to Florida.
Right, but the joke is that Florida is not the South. People, if I say I'm from the South, they're like, oh, from where? I'm like, Florida, and they're like, that's not the South.
It's worse. No, just kidding. I'm just kidding.
It's definitely its reputation has definitely been in decline in the last couple of years. But I grew up with people who had accents and stuff, and because people say, "Well, you don't have an accent," and it's like.
Right.
Because all of my family were Northerners.
Right.
Like, my parents were from Ohio, all my grandparents. So my whole support system talks like, I just talk like a Northerner.
Which is still kind of a, that's a luck of the draw thing, too, because when you're in Ohio, your neighbor could have a West Virginia accent, and then the neighbor on the the side has that weird, that thing that starts in Cleveland, Toledo, and then becomes Chicago, Minnesota, wherever you go. Because there's something that starts in Cleveland that some people have where they're like...
There's something that starts in Cleveland.
There's something there in the water where they they're like, they just have the beginning, the inklings of hat dag. It's not like that yet, but it's there. It's in Toledo, and it hits Chicago, of course. And,
I lived in Toledo for a while, actually.
Yeah, Toledo's kind of cool.
It's very. I only lived there for a year and a half as like a first grader, but it was the first time I ever moved, and it was a kind of a devastating whole event. But that's a sidetrack. But the thing I was going to say is, even though people say Florida's not the South, what I appreciate about growing up in Florida is that the Southern mentality and some of those like classic cultural Southern touchstones are very much a part of my psyche, like very much in my mind. When I write, and a lot of the times I write about the South, or I think about the South, not in like as the South will rise again, not like that, but like more of the agriculture and the climate and the hot summers, the long stretches of time where it felt like it would be 90 degrees forever.
Yeah,
but like
okay.
just the way of growing up in the South, the food, the diversity. I went to I'm ramrodding your whole podcast here.
Go.
But the high school, I went to 2 years of high school in Florida and then moved to Ohio for the last 2 years of my high school. And I went to a school that was like over 2,000 kids, and like there was equal amounts white kids, African American kids, Cuban kids, Puerto Rican kids, and those are different, by the way. In Florida, it is a big deal. You're Mexican, Hispanic, you're Cuban. Sure. And so, but there was a very, very diverse people that I grew up with and was always around. And then my junior and senior year, I moved to Ohio, and there was like 2 African American students in my class.
That
and
sounds
it was
like Ohio.
Yeah, and it was like... But here's the funny thing, okay, is that growing up in the South, when you learn about the Civil War, you learn about the Civil War being like this, like the North was like, they're the saviors and they defeated the awful South, But the funny thing is like I was shell shocked because I expected the North to be more diverse than the South, but then I was like, oh, wait a second, that's not the way it is.
Yeah, I mean, that's a long-standing argument from people from South, North, wherever.
Right.
But notice that. I know Randy Newman has a song called Rednecks where he talks about how compartmentalizing African Americans. He talks about Boston. He talks about certain Harlem. He talks about places in California. Like Roxbury, Boston. Yeah, we're in Warren. And here's an Ohio example. The Ohio example is Mahoning County versus Columbiana County. Columbiana County has more white people than you could possibly imagine, and Mahoning County, in a way that is segregated, it's like there's black people. And maybe this reflects, there was one year where I'm pretty sure the most Republican votes per capita or whatever was Columbiana County, most Democratic Mahoning.
That doesn't surprise me in the least.
And I'm not trying to
politicize.
Yeah, I'm not trying. I'm political, but there are some weird moments in the North where people think that it is. Yeah, man. Like we think we got it all handled, and we're just turning a blind eye, and we know exactly what not to say.
We're more liberal. We're more progressive. I work a blue-collar job here in Mahoning County, in Trumbull County. I work as a factory worker, a machinist, and my parents were white-collar workers, and my mom was a nurse, and my dad was a pastor, and I was shell-shocked again. Another thing that really surprised me is when I started living in this world, like as a blue collar worker, and like the idea of unions and things became like this thing, and people would talk about scabs and all that stuff, and I would be like, well, they got to go to work. Like, why would you beat this guy up for crossing like a picket line or something? And it was so foreign to me because I didn't grow up that way in a family that was blue collar and stuff. And then now, spending the last 8 years as a machinist and working at this factory, I totally understand it. I totally see it, and it has been. I'm so thankful for that time to have learned this.
Yeah. I mean, all this experience in your life has funneled into a poetic mind which you possess. So why do you have such a well-rounded opinion? Why are you coming from, like, that life to a machinist life, well, being a poet, well, appreciating off mic? You mentioned you like basketball and comics.
Coming from the South, and then now, but being rooted in the North, and I never really thought about it.
Yeah, why are you so well-rounded?
Well, I think my mom was, even though I grew up in a pastor's house and it was conservative, my mom was always determined to expose me to as much as possible. Like, she never sheltered me from culture or what church people call the world. She never sheltered me from music or artistic experiences. And my dad is a musician, and so like he wasn't afraid of non-religious music or anything like that. So I had parents. I think that as we moved across the country and all these things in my childhood, I think I would have to attribute to them that they kind of, even if they didn't always understand me or what I was going through, they always encouraged me to absorb and assimilate. Cool. Wherever we moved, if we moved to, if I were to track it out, I started in Ocala, and we lived in Toledo for a little while, then we lived in a place called Bethalto, Illinois for a while, then back to Ocala for a few years, and then to Akron, Ohio. Mm-hmm. So like we did this round, this up and down a few times in my childhood, and but all along the way, my parents never let me become reclusive. Mm-hmm. They never let me just kind of go inside my head alone. It was always like figuring out this new community, new friends, and new schools, and kind of pushing me to always like appreciate what was different about where we always were, and it allowed me to absorb little things wherever I went.
Well, that's awesome. To hear from a poet who is not self-obsessed is a rare thing. So let's not go any further. Let's not go any further without you reading a poem for our audience.
Okay.
You have a book here called Mongrel that you published.
I do, yeah.
Where can people get this book?
So my books you can find them if you search Mongrel, Brandon Noel, like if you just Google that.
And that's Noel.
Yeah, just like
Noel.
Christmas. Yeah, that was a big contention growing up, that my last name is the same as the French word for Christmas. Mm-hmm. But if you just search Brandon Noel, Noel, Mongrel, you can find it. But the actual like website address, it's kind of like long, but it's at lulu.com, which is like, it's a self-publishing website. But it works, for me. It's not glamorous or kind of flashy, and I don't make a whole lot of money. But the URL, which I'm stalling if you can't tell, to find.
That's okay.
To find my URL.
We have some time.
Right. So the URL is www.lulu.com/spotlight/Brandon L. Noel. The L is just my middle initial, Brandon L. Noel.
Cool.
So, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so
and all my books are there. So
yeah, he has more than just Mongrel, but he's going to read us something out of Mongrel now. So keep in mind, listeners, that you can go find him later on if you get intrigued by this. What are you going to read us?
So fittingly, this is a poem called I Can't Decide If I Miss the South.
Oh, perfect.
Or not.
Perfect.
The wedding procession of autumn comes in with the lovely goldenrod plants, not much more than weeds. They grow 10 feet deep off the road and tall over me, a resurrection line. My daughter Raina strolls the sidewalks next to me, stashing away fallen leaves in one of my many unused journals. She marvels at them. As I prattle on about chlorophyll, she says, "Daddy, you like the ones for their shape, but I like them for their color, even if they are from the same tree." And she is right. My dad was never an absent father. He came to every basketball game and was so invested in them that he was named the honorary sixth man. Years later, whether I played the inspector villain in Javert, or the clueless hero cowboy Curly, or Dickens' restless soul in Sidney Carton, my father was out there in the audience applauding. But to this day, I worry that I don't know him, that I don't know the other him, the one that is underneath, and that he cannot see past his son for who now that I am. Little one, if I didn't go down and rest with the flowers, with the summer in its soil, with the old self, then how could you know me? As I watched Raina discovering the layers of her own world, I took her under the nickel pines and the burly oaks, and we laid down in the wet grass, because the change in the earth is mine. The sticky nights of the pagan fall are mine, with their harvests and their green fires. The dominant hand she scribbles her name with is mine. The writing palm and the short notes it leaves in the kitchen. The star Polaris is mine. So I plucked it out of its northern sky, and I planted it in her left knee while she slept, where it would burn and pull and sing in her standing hours.
Nice, man. Wow, it really gets going at those last three.
Those last three stanzas?
Yeah, it's amazing. Yeah, that's cool. Let me see the beginning of it again. So
okay.
So, I can't decide if I missed the South or not. Is the poem name?
Right.
So, you said something where. Let me find it again.
Sure. Yeah.
To this day, I worry that I don't know him.
Yeah.
That I don't know the other him.
That's the turn of the poem right there. The axis of the whole poem shifts.
So
that line.
When you say you don't know the other him, are you saying that you worry that you never knew him?
No, I worried that there is a part of my father he has always hidden from me. It's
Gotcha.
a part of him.
Right.
I have known him, but I feel like there's a door in him he keeps closed.
Cool.
And that it's not that he doesn't want me to see or that he's ashamed of it, but it's so private and it's so personal. And this poem reflects on that, and that I don't want Raina to grow up, my daughter, who's 8. I don't want her to grow up and reflect as an adult that there's a part of me she does not know.
Cool.
You know?
I like that. And then, something about that struck me, and I think it was because my first question was, to what end would you be satisfied if you knew that part? You know what I'm saying? And obviously you can't answer that because you haven't known that part of him. But what is your guess on that? Say you got to know everything you wanted to know within reason.
Well, the truth is, there actually may not exist. It may be imaginary.
Right.
And I'm willing to admit that the part of him that I worry I do not know, it may be a fictional aspect of all the things I wish for him to exist.
Whoa, wow, okay. That's awesome.
And that it is better for me to have the part of him I wish I knew than to know it doesn't exist.
Interesting.
And this is something I've struggled with in my life a lot, which is in loving a person, how much of a person do we love, and how much of it is the aspects of them we imagine about them we love.
Yeah.
And there's a difference, and I don't know that we consciously juggle them. But to focus back on your answer to your question about my dad, there are parts of him I hope exist.
Yeah.
And I just feel like I just want him. I'll tell a little story to kind of highlight what this is about.
Sure.
My dad doesn't drink. He's never drank. He's a pastor, you know. And I grew up like that. And he does not judge me or look down on me. I don't want people to get the wrong idea about him, because I like to drink beer, wine, alcohol of any kind. Just bring it on. I don't care. So I wrote a poem for my dad. I gave it to him at Christmas when a month or two before Mongrel came out. And it's in Mongrel. It's called Pastor Larry's Son is the name of the poem. And that's my dad's name, Larry.
Okay.
And in the poem, I mentioned the first time I ever tried a beer.
Oh, cool.
And so I read this poem to my dad at Christmas time, and the first beer I ever tried was Christmas Ale, Great Lakes Christmas Ale. So it's Christmas time. I'm reading this poem to my dad, and he loved it. He really appreciated the poem as a whole. It was a long poem, and he's like, you had to put that part in there about the first time you had that beer or whatever. And I was like, yeah. I was like, Dad, you don't understand. I've had a beer with so many of my friends, father figures and friend figures, and everybody. It's a modern breaking of the bread.
Yes.
And I'm like, and I had some Christmas ales at his house at this thing, and I was like, I was almost tempting him, just do this with me, share this with me, please. And he doesn't understand why it's meaningful to me. Mm-hmm. To him, it's not that he's resistant because he thinks it's immoral. He's resistant because he doesn't understand. I think I just cracked something on your podcast just now.
What is that?
Okay, I had a eureka. You saw it in my face.
Yeah.
Which is, I think the part of him that I want to know is the parts of him that are me that I wish were there.
Okay. So you want to see, it doesn't have to be this, but in some form you want to see him with a couple beers in him because you've never seen that before or whatever.
To be more specific, what I think I'm looking for in him, the part that I say I worry that I do not know him, holy shit. I'm coming to a revelation. This is therapeutic. The part of him that I when I say that line, I fear I do not know him. What I'm fearing is that who I am does not come from him.
Okay.
That's what I'm afraid of.
Okay.
And if I don't come from him,
mm-hmm.
where do I come from?
Where do you come from? Yeah.
So to not see myself in him, and it's not just alcohol, but you know what I mean? That's
sure, that's just a little
thing.
jumping off.
That's just a little point.
Yeah.
But that's what I worry about when I think what a child says. When I say, I fear I do not know him, it's saying, mm-hmm. I fear that maybe we are so different that the parts of me that I love the most don't mm-hmm. come from you.
Right.
And there's a kind of primal fear in that.
Okay.
My daughter asks me all the time, if she gets in trouble and things, she'll be like, Daddy, did your mommy ever spank you for that? Did you ever get in trouble? And I realize what she's doing in a way is wanting to see that same lineage. She wants to know, did I get in trouble for the same thing she got in trouble for? She's doing it instinctually, trying to find the connections between who she is and who I am.
Where do you think that comes from, wanting to know that you come from this person?
Well, with Raina, her just that little story. I think that it's the existential dread of existence, of life itself. We kind of have this over. If you think about it, if you're quiet and you're like, oh, the universe is so big and we are so small and we're gonna not be here very soon. And I think that tying ourselves to our past. Mm-hmm. And because my parents eventually got divorced, I think it's become even more important to me to try and root myself, trying to find, it's the way, it's the same, I think it's the same reason why people practice different religions. I think some people, not everybody, but I don't want to generalize. But I came from that world, and I know that I think that some people, they practice religion in order to try and root themselves in something, mm-hmm. In order to stave off existential dread, and so, I think that's the best answer I can give for that, I guess.
This doesn't solve the problem at hand with wanting someone to have come from someone else very obviously.
Right.
But, and this is something I've mentioned on other episodes, does the concept of nothingness give you any sort of comfort? You were nothing before you got here, you're nothing after.
Actually, the concept, I think what you're even kind of hinting at is a kind of nihilism, nothingness, right?
But in a more positive light.
More positive. Positive nothingness.
Say you get embarrassed by something. You get off the stoop and you trip.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh, God, Lee just saw me trip.
Right.
And then you think about the dust that you might be at 200 years from now.
Right.
Does that make you feel like the trip was less embarrassing?
I don't think about it when I trip.
Well, no, but I'm saying if you have.
Overall, I like your question about does the idea of nothingness solve anything for me because, yeah, I love you too.
So what you doing?
He has a podcast too, and we're recording for his podcast on his phone right now.
Mine's not as cool as his.
No, that's not true. His is way better. He's been doing it for longer. But now you're on it.
Yeah.
So I think the idea of nothingness does something for me because it helps me realize that in all my in all my efforts to search for meaning,
Sure.
and all the empty answers I might find, it's okay.
Nothingness.
Yeah, it's okay. It makes it okay because so much of life is a search for certainty. You know, we go to our job, we want to try and control and produce some kind of certainty for our lives. And lately, after going through some things in my life in the last couple of years myself, the idea of nothingness and no control has given me comfort in the kind of weird chaos that I there is no certainty to be had. Right. So the fact that I'm uncertain and that life is chaotic is normal, and I'm okay with that now.
Yeah.
Instead of trying to control it and make it do what I want it to do.
Oh, sure. And obviously I know I panned that answer out of you, but like I appreciate that you chose that poem because we're big on childhood at Nursery.
Right. And I had pre-chose that, and then it worked out. It
works out well. Yeah. And you've already gotten into it well enough, but as far as what your childhood was like, but what are you now religiously as a result?
So I was raised in a Christian household, and I was actually a pastor myself. I pastored a church in Kent, Ohio for about a year. It was called With No Walls was the name of the church. And I was a part of a denomination called the Church of God out of Cleveland, Tennessee. It's like a Pentecostal charismatic denomination. And I was raised Assemblies of God, which is another charismatic. They got all these denominations and all this stuff. Mm-hmm. But I came up in all this, the great-grandson of a pastor and church planner all through West Virginia. And I have all this lineage, and I had all this, there was a lot of weight and expectation in growing up with having all those grandfathers and fathers and stuff. But what I would say I've come out as a result of that is a hopeful agnostic.
Yeah.
Like I'm a hopeful agnostic in that I believe the deepest questions. Yeah. No, you're not getting a rash. You don't have a rash. You're okay. When you scratch your skin, it will turn red. So the this is actually a really beautiful example.
I like this
of everything because when I say I'm hopefully agnostic, it means that I'm pretty sure the biggest and deepest questions are unanswerable.
Sure.
There is no way to dispassionately prove that God exists and that these things happened and that they happened the way that the tribalistic denominations say they happen. They say this happened. There's no way to concretely prove all these things, and that's okay. I think that the search for those answers is no different than Adam in the myth of Adam and Eve. Adam reaching up and plucking a fruit from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. It's that same. We want to know what God knows. Mm-hmm. I heard that story growing up my whole life. The tree of the knowledge of good and evil. They ate that fruit, but it wasn't until I became an adult and I thought, why didn't he want them to eat of the knowledge? And I think the thing is that if you look at it metaphorically, there's God's knowledge, right? And it's not that he didn't want us to have knowledge, but I think that agnosticism is an appropriate approach to say, it's not that I don't want to know. It's that I'm okay not knowing.
Yeah.
I'm okay not having the answers.
Sure.
Now, religiously, I'm probably atheistic because my dad once asked me, being a pastor, he said, so what now, Brandon? Do you think that all roads lead to heaven? That's a famous Christian kind of question. Mm-hmm. And I was like, no, I don't think all roads lead to heaven, and including Christianity. None of those roads are the road. It's like life is the road. And what derails it is man trying to say, yeah, we got the answer to these deep human questions, and if you disagree with the way we answered these questions, then boy, are you in for it.
Exactly. Right. Well, I mean, I like that answer. Obviously, again, like
I'm long-winded, by the way. I'm
that's
sorry.
That's fine. So am I. I appreciate that. I like you meeting me
it's the
halfway.
pastor in my blood. You know?
That's great.
I just will keep going.
Good. No, don't apologize for that ever. But I like that you're looking at it that way. It's hard. Like I hear you kind of have to be long-winded in these explanations because it's hard to get to that point where you're okay with not controlling.
And I'm not anti-establishment. You know, I don't. No. And I don't think I'm not of
it's
the.
Not like pro-chaos.
Right. Right. I'm not like thinking like, oh, tear down the churches.
No.
And they take away their buildings and everything, because I wouldn't be where I am had I not started the journey there. And everybody starts from a different point of injection. You know, we kind of all come along it in a different place. And I think what's really funny is the name of your podcast is Nursery. And just a week ago, I said to a friend, the church is more like a tree nursery. It should be the place where they raise up the saplings, they get them strong and healthy, and then they kick them out. And they say, all right, now you're going to go get planted somewhere. Mm-hmm. And you know what? Wherever you're planted, the people who are around you should benefit from your shade and the fruit of your leaves. And you're going to do something for the people in the community around you. I think that there's something... It's funny because now here I am sitting on your podcast called Nursery. I think that... too oftentimes there are trees that never leave the nursery.
Yeah, similarly enough, I often refer to church as daycare for adults, and sometimes that sounds like I'm talking down, but I'm not.
No.
I have no qualms with it. Maybe when I was younger I was trying to rebel, but now I'm cool with it.
Can I ask you a question on your show? Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
We just did a whole episode where I was asking you questions, but
which was awesome.
Have you ever thought about... I ask this to people sometimes just as a launching off point for things, but do you wonder why 200 years ago there were no gyms?
I don't wonder why, because I know exactly why they weren't there.
Why weren't there gyms?
Because the stuff we were doing was the exercise.
Right. Our daily lifestyle provided exercise.
Yeah.
We couldn't have a sedentary life. Mm-hmm. Okay, there was no. If you had been in colonial times or pre-industrial revolution times, been like, I'm going to have this building where people come and work out. They'll be like, what, when we get off our from farming or something? Mm-hmm. And likewise, I tend to liken the current iteration of the church as their gymnasiums, their spiritual gymnasiums.
Okay.
They largely exist because our day-to-day lives are devoid of the kind of community we long for.
Yeah. There is a practice right now, a very modern practice called being present. And it makes me sick because it's just life. It's being bottled and sold.
God.
And hey, listeners, Brandon and I aren't saying those were the days. We didn't live back in those days.
No, we didn't. Right.
And I'm not saying that was better. There were bad things.
Oh, gosh, more things were horrible then. But I think...
But yeah, the point being
is that I think that just like with the Makeshift Poets, it's a way of finding a community and offering people want community. Mm-hmm. They want a place to share, be understood, be known. They want to have those things. The church offers an avenue to that. They also offer a lot of other baggage that you kind of have to take with it.
Yeah.
And I think that if you can find community without all that baggage, you can find a good thing.
Yeah, and that's kind of brings us back to rooting, like you said, to putting down roots and stuff, and which is like something you can't help but do, and it's great. Again, it's not a pro-chaos statement to try to know that nothingness is okay, but like what you're saying kind of speaks to the idea that oftentimes makes people quit. They see just the littlest flaw in what they're doing, and they become couch potatoes for the rest of their life.
Yeah.
And then they join a gym. But like like they do this thing where
I need to join a gym, by the way, and get my ass in shape. It's awful.
Oh, me too. No, yeah, we're not doing anti-gym talk either. But the speculation leads me to believe that people see that they can't control certain things, right? But instead of doing what you do, where you're like, oh, hey, I see that that's all of life. It's okay.
Right.
What they do is they shut it down. They quit.
Yeah.
They shut it down. And they don't realize that every single thing they do is flawed, and that's what makes it beautiful. Pretty simple message.
It is simple.
But like, they don't see it.
Yeah.
They've made one mistake, so now they've quit. I can't tell you how many people that have done that. There would be tons more groups like Makeshift if they hadn't, but they have. They have quit.
Well, spending my entire adolescence and early adulthood in the church, what I've seen more than anything else is how people, when they realize that their religious paradigm or their faith paradigm is flawed, they do one of two things. Either they double down and they deny that the flaw exists, and they kind of cling to it even tighter and become fundamentalists. Or they reject it completely, walk away, and decry that this is all bad and nobody should do it. And very few people take the middle road, which is go, you know what, this is flawed. And now that I understand that, I'm going to ask myself how I'm going to live and deal with that.
Yeah,
in its own way.
There's that middle road where you can say, this is tentative, much like life. Let me just live in it while it's here.
Right. It doesn't mean you accept those flaws and not want to change them per se. It doesn't mean you just say, well, it's just like with, wage gap discrimination and things like, we don't just go, well, it's flawed and we accept it. We still could push for change. But I mean...
but you don't let it cripple you along the way.
You don't let it cripple you and say that nothing is worth doing, and you also don't double down and ignore that there is a flaw.
Which is also just as crippling in my opinion.
They are. You kind of have to shake hands with the flaws and accept that doubt and uncertainty are beautiful aspects of living.
Yeah.
Not to be feared or run away from.
No. And if that was the case for more people, more makeshift poetry gatherings would exist and with other names, So when we get back to that, why don't you talk to me more specifically, just if listeners are interested, as to how you got this group of people together to form the Makeshift Poetry?
Yeah, so, to talk about the poetry group, this is a thing. I've been writing poetry since I was probably 8 or 9, reading and writing it. It's really simple, kind of kid limerick kind of things. But it just it was kind of an ever-present companion. It was kind of a thing that was always there, little journals, little scraps of paper. And that's followed me my whole life. And I was beginning to spend a lot of time at this place, Havana House in Niles, Ohio. It's a cigar bar. You can go in and have a beer and smoke a cigar. And I met a lot of good friends there. It became like the place I would go to retreat, and I did a lot of writing there. I wrote basically all of Mongrel there, sitting there, and it's just my zone. It's where I relax. It's where I can write. And I eventually had people being like, oh, what are you doing? I'm like, oh, I'm writing a poem. And they'd be like, oh, you write poetry? I write poetry. And then it started with one person who was the first guest on my podcast. Her name is Samantha Dunlap. And she was the first person who took interest and was like, oh, blah, blah, blah. I write poetry too. And so immediately it was like, well, here, you read one of mine. And I was like, but you got to let me read one of yours. It was like a trade, and so she let me read one of hers, and it was real, just whenever we saw each other, oh, you got something new? Oh yeah, it was totally unplanned, totally spontaneous. And then a third person was added, and then a fourth person, and it was still very spontaneous until February of 2015. It was the first time that we were like, hey, let's all plan to get here on this Tuesday and do it all together so we know we're all going to be here.
Yeah.
And we've been doing it since February 2015 that way.
That's interesting to me that the people were magnetized to you. Because that's great. I mean, it speaks to your character, but it's also just puzzling and nice that...
Oh, you found some rocks.
Nice.
Yeah. Some nice rocks. Don't... Whoa, we're getting violent over here. You're going to have to go inside if you're going to be like that.
No.
Go ahead. What you were going to say?
I was just going to say kind of beautiful that the people were intrigued by poetry in Ohio. It's hard to find.
Well, so the introduction, if you buy our book, The Makeshift Volume 1, which was, The Makeshift Volume 1 is a collection of poems from everybody who was in the Makeshift writing group for that first year. Now we're in our second year, and we're planning on having an annual release every year. But we, in the introduction, if you read the introduction to the book, I talk about how I believed poetry was dead as an art form. Because at the time I was considering that art forms have movements, and poetry now doesn't have movements anymore. Like, there's no period. You know what I mean? Like, there's no structuralism. Like, when you look at modern fashion industry or the modern art industry, you can still categorize things by periods and movements of art. And poetry now no longer has that. But it's only because in our modern day and world, literacy is so prevalent. And in the past, poetry was just as amazing as painting, because the skill was still like rare. But we live in a time of such high literacy that I had felt at the time that poetry was dead, that there was no real art movement of poetry anymore, since postmodernism, Anyway, that's all heady nonsense. But
No, not at all. Not at all.
But I was there, and what was amazing is that I met these people, and I became to gather together, and the Makeshift taught me that poetry was most certainly not dead, and that the real life of poetry is as like breaking bread, just like I talked about sharing a beer, that the sharing of poetry is like a warm loaf of bread that I baked, and we're going to sit down and enjoy it. And that's what's alive about it, is the community it can create.
Yeah, well, much like your community, me and my buddies in my band Third Class, we tend to take a communal approach in our music, in that our songs are about what the fans tell us they're about at the end of the day. We'll take their suggestions and write another song based on how
authorial intent.
Yeah. And so we love that. We like to think of it as a little campfire thing. It's been the same members, but it's like we're just feeding off of the friends we've made through the journey. And so poetry, you're doing the exact right thing, because poetry should be under that same spotlight the music is. That's the problem.
Yeah.
I know that it might not be considered a performance art because of the stigma of the academics.
Well, it feels like there's slam poetry,
Right.
But
that's what's weird about it.
I hate how slam poetry... I love slam poetry, but I hate how it has come to the forefront.
It's overshadowed. Yeah,
it's like, unless it's slam poetry, that you're up there rhyming and slamming it and singing it, and you've got a whole thing that, like, if you just want to get up there and read, like, what I just did for your show here, like, there's no performance, they don't look at it, there's no entertainment performance. So, I hate that it's kind of like slam poetry or bust for performing, what I mean, in a lot of ways.
Yeah, it should be much more theatrical. So I like that you're doing it in a communal style, because it should be right up there with music, right up there with theater.
Say that rhyming poetry that you don't really like? Because I make rhymes.
No, I didn't say I don't like rhyming poetry. I didn't say I don't like rhyming poetry. What I was saying is that there's a form of poetry called slam poetry that is like, people get up and they focus on the rhyme, and they have kind of like it's almost like rapping, but without anyway.
Brandon, do you write poems?
Yes.
What kind?
Usually like stories.
Cool.
And
like your sister's.
How I'm feeling and like what's happening at the place.
That's cool. So your poems take the form of stories. That's good. That's always a great place to start. What a young age to be writing poetry already. That's great.
I'm already 8, so.
Yeah, it's
Are
not
you?
so young, right?
Don't. Do you remember back in the day when you were 4? Those were the days. When you were 4, those were the days.
She has a really good poem that she wrote about going to her sister's
Cousin, which is my cousin.
Yeah, her cousin's birthday party. It was a 2-year-old's birthday, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And that's my favorite of your poems.
To be 2 again.
Right. The memories.
That's one of your favorites of hers?
I don't know what it is. It's just some journal, but I don't know what
Welcome to the life of a writer, my dear.
Yeah, man. Can't find it.
It's somewhere.
Yeah, man. Pretty soon you will have burnt them and rewritten them. No.
Gosh, don't follow in my footsteps.
No. But yeah, I mean, yeah, it should be more theatrical of an event to have a poem written, read rather.
It should be appreciated. I don't have any delusions of grandeur, but it's a bookmark.
Yep, I'm nosy.
But but I think that the truth is I just wish that there was forum for it.
Exactly. Yeah.
That there's
and it could
there's
be
a lack
less
of
stuffy.
forum.
It could be less stuffy. The poets you go to see are on campuses a lot. That needs to change.
Or we have there's the Rust Belt Poets in downtown Warren that go to the Trumbull Arts Gallery. They have their readings there, and that's run by a guy named Ron Book. I've been to their readings, and they're more traditional, like get up in front of an audience, and I think there's such a need for that. And the people that I've seen there reading, they're very different than the culture that we attract necessarily at the Makeshift. But we're open to anybody. Overall, I just feel that more forums, diverse kinds of forums, tables, podiums, stages, that I would love to see that at the next House of Blues concert, like the House of Blues is having such and such a band and blah, 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 and in between sets, the poet so-and-so from Cleveland, Ohio, getting up and reading in between the sets. Why not? Why not feature poets in that way too?
That's a great suggestion, because they're, infamously there'd be these weird stand-up comedians opening for rock bands and stuff. Sometimes it would be a weird reaction from the crowd, but sometimes they would get into it and they would work off each other's energy. Why can't the same be true for poetry? Yeah.
Right, fill that
so
time.
I think that's right, man. I think that's an astute observation, and they don't have to have bradizio when they do it. They don't. It doesn't have to be slam poetry. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but
no,
it doesn't have to be that. Some of my favorite shows we played as an indie pop band are house shows, and poetry can live there. It can live there and survive and even gasp, make money or whatever.
I just want to say, like, to people, because not everybody can do slam poetry. Like, slam poetry requires, I'm not trying to like keep talking about it, but like it requires another skill set.
Yeah.
That poetry, what I like about it is that I've met so many people in my life who are like, oh, I just can't do that. And then maybe I've spent some time with them, and like they'll be like, oh yeah, I can do that. And it's like they have this idea of what the skill set is, but truthfully, an 8-year-old can do it. And it's just as valid to me. The slam poetry requires it's its own performance style, which is great. But I feel like poets who can't do that maybe are shy or timid about wanting to perform, because they're like, well, I can't do that.
Mm-hmm. And I've tried my hand at something that was close to it, and I had a great time as a musician with the internal rhymes that came out of it and stuff like that. But I tried my best to stay away from direct rhymes, so I think that's exactly what took me away from being able to do it. Because
you have performance experience of being in a band.
But I didn't try my hand at doing it out loud. I just only tried it on paper. It was more fun for me on paper. It shows. It's weird because that's not even slam poetry, but I did stuff. Right. But I did stuff that was like totally akin to it. It was so fun to just roll with the rhyme instead of the meaning that you were, But so I have respect for them. So listeners, don't get it twisted. I'm not saying, we're so much better. We're so
I felt like I was over-explaining, but I wanted to be clear.
No, be clear. There are some people that listen that might care about poetry, man. I mean, I like the people that listen to your podcast must. I mean, it's there. You have to have faith. But okay, so we're going to probably head out at the end of this, but is there anything you want to tell listeners? Any advice you have for creatives in Ohio that are listening to you and me talk right now?
Don't keep your work a secret. Every writer over the last year that worked with us with the Makeshift, if they were all here right now, and we've had as many as 25 or so come to a reading, but the core number seems to hover around 12 to 15 people. And if you bought a copy of the Makeshift, like those writers over that first year, what they've all told me individually is the same thing. It echoes the same thing, which is that I have grown so much over the last year. And the growth has nothing to do with me per se. It has to do with the fact that it was no longer just a thing they did on their phone. It was no longer just a thing they kept in their journal and didn't show anybody. But the bringing it out and sharing it. Are you familiar with the theory of quantum entanglement?
No.
Okay, so in physics, there's there's a notion of entanglement, which is that you cannot observe a system without affecting that system. So by bringing your work, and that's a super simplified version. I just really boiled it down.
That's fine. That's what we do.
But the point is that I believe like that. By bringing your work into the public, sharing it, even if it's just with one person. I'm not telling you have to go to a reading tomorrow, but if you have work, bring it out, share it, because as soon as you do, that act alone will cause an effect on your work, and you'll see growth happen.
Yeah, that's very cool. Raina, advice for the listener?
What?
Sounds good.
That sounds good to me.
Just throwing sticks in the front yard like the old days. We don't need gyms or fancy toys. We play with sticks and rocks.
That's right.
What I like to do.
Listeners could only witness this.
Yeah. Cartwheels in the front yard, sticks thrown around, almost a rock through the window. It's wild.
Well,
and it's great.
The Nursery Podcast, right?
Yeah, man. It's a childhood. There's always an element of childhood here, so it's actually nice to have her in the background here. So listeners, need I remind you, the backlog of the episodes, thirdclass.net, bullskit.com. If you'd like to find Mongrel by Brandon Noel, please search Mongrel, Brandon Noel, or check out lulu.com and search for Mongrel. Makeshift Poets, check out the Makeshift Podcast on iTunes, Makeshift Volume 1 on Facebook, and can you say our tagline, "Look, Mom, we're on a podcast"?
Look, Mom, we're on a podcast.
I'm poking him.
So, people, thanks for listening. We really appreciate it. You stay with us. Bye.
No, Jack doesn't know it's 16. Okay, I don't know it's 16. But Jack, I won't ever say it again. I promise. I can swear. On the go. Yep. See ya. See ya. Bye. The end. Holy Jack. You mean Jerry? I mean Jerry.